And the correct way to grow that is what growth engines are. It's that there is a particular way that this engine type is constructed. That means if you feed it certain types of fuel, it is more likely to produce growth because of why the growth is happening. What is the need that it's meeting in people? So there are these different types of engines that you can have inside of your platform that if you give them the right fuel and maintain them in the right way, they'll work for you. And then the goal is that they would work for you for longevity. So if you continue to fuel it, if you continue to give it the maintenance that it needs, etc., that it will grow in the correct direction and it will. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast. My name is Becca Syme, and I am an author success coach, and I've coached more than 6,000 individual authors. And my goal on this podcast is to do author for life content, things that will make us be able to feel better resourced and feel more secure in having an author career for our entire lifetime. So we've been shifting a little bit to talk about platform growth recently because alignment and platform growth is also really important. It isn't just us as a person that needs to be aligned, right? It's also our platform needs to be aligned to help us with better decision making. And when we're talking about alignment in something like marketing tactics or growth, we are primarily talking about decision fatigue, like reducing decision fatigue and increasing the chances that we're going to hit a place that we can be successful. So, a lot of the experimenting that we do as authors early in our career, trying to learn how to understand how to make the right decisions, right? Some of that is confused by the way that the author help industry works. And this is through no fault of its own. Everyone who's doing content for authors is being helpful in terms of, well, I guess I should caveat, I don't know every single person who's doing it, but everyone that I know is attempting to be helpful and is helping people. It's just that the people that they're helping aren't the only people who are listening. So it's important for us as listeners of content to be able to understand why certain things work and why they don't. So it's easy and quick for us to say, that's not for me, that's not for me. And my goal in talking about platform alignment is specifically to say there are certain things when we're talking about a growth engine for a vertical platform, like what is it that creates the platform to grow in a vertical direction? That is an engine that makes the growth happen, right? So when we're talking about growth engines for vertical platforms, the goal is to understand how to feed the engine. What is the correct fuel to put inside of it? Essentially, this is what we're all doing when we're trying to grow sales. And of course, I have to caveat every time, right? Those of you who have followed my content for a long time will be familiar with the phrase Loki is in charge. And that is my way of explaining how complicated the variables can be sometimes when you're trying to assess what has gone wrong in a particular launch, etc. Those of you who have coached with me after you have done launch what you would consider to be failures, which I rarely consider, like it's so rare that I'm like, oh yeah, we really screwed this up and we did a bad job of something. Because most of the time what's happening is it's a Loki in charge attribution. Not to say that there is no reason, but to say that it's probably not possible to see the reason no matter what you do, because the reason has to do with things that are outside of your control, that nothing you could have done would have changed, right? So when I say Loki's in charge, I am not trying to be pedantic. I'm not trying to write off people's frustrations. I'm trying to say there are some times in our career when we stop trying to understand exactly what has happened. We acknowledge that there are factors outside of our control, and then we move on to the next project. We move on to the next marketing, etc. There are a lot of calls where Loki is in charge comes up specifically because once you have exhausted the options of likely like things that you could change right now, it is not worth your time. We are having diminishing returns by continuing. And this is where choice architecture becomes really important for me, right? Where I'm trying to help people make more aligned decisions so that we can more quickly learn what we need to learn from the situation and then realign our sights to how long of a game this really is. Most of us are not going to have short game author problems, right? So if you think about the difference between a sprint and a marathon, you use your energy differently in a sprint than you do in a marathon. And what happens in most careers, almost all careers, there are some exceptions, but almost all careers, you want to try to take off at the very beginning of the career. You're going to expend the most of your energy right away trying to see if you can get momentum out the gate. And if you do, then you have to start building an organization around yourself that will allow you to continue that growth and continue to make money off of that growth so you can invest back in. And we talked about this in the business phases stuff. We'll talk more about that. But when you do not take off right away, then you enter into marathon mode. And I think a lot of us don't understand this when we're thinking about the growth of a platform. We're like, well, I have to go hard 100% of the time, all the time. And I'm like, no, no, no. We expend the energy when we have it. And then when our system says it's time to stop, we slow down. And then we start doing marathon mode, which is the maximization or optimization of the type of platform growth that you have, and then understanding what's actually making the platform grow. And I think the hard part about me being a personality person, so like you kind of have the strengths or the Enneagram approach, right? Which is like, who am I? What is it about me as a person that is different and individual, and how does that affect? We talked a little bit in the last video that we did about the spine of alignment, right? When there is something that has a lot of gravity to it, a lot of security to it, that is pulling in and aligning a lot of our behaviors. There is a way to treat that spine that makes it act in the way that it's supposed to, and it makes it grow in a healthy way. And there are alignment decisions you can make, right? Saying yes to things and no to things, putting more energy in certain areas and not, that will help your spine stay straight and that will help you be able to live and function in a way that is the most optimal alignment health for that bone in your body, right? And the spine of personality alignment requires a lot of attention at certain points in our lives because some of our strong, like first order problems, which is like that's the first thing that you solve, right? Some of our alignment stuff is more taxed by situations. So, for instance, those of us who have high empathy are more taxed right now when a higher number of people are in crisis or struggling. Empathy is going to have a really hard time being online without losing all of their time to being online. And so the aligned decision for high empathy people is minimize the amount of time you spend online because it is not an aligned behavior for you to expend 100% of your energy trying to do things about events around you that you are not capable of doing, right? The goal is to use a tool, and we talked about the Johari window. They use a tool of some kind in trying to understand the situation itself and what's in your control and what isn't, what is actionable for me and what isn't, etc. So that is an example of like you align your behavior to this spine so that the spine can be at its healthiest and it can function in longevity for you. And then you sort of have the alignment of, and I'm going to use the platform growth engine as an example. Archetypes are like this as well. Archetypes are not a personality. Archetypes are a set of decisions that you make that are a particular pathway that produce a particular thing. Personality can have some impact on it for sure. So if you think about the platform growth engines as a archetypal designation in the sense that it is not necessarily personality relevant. So you could have people who fit into each of these four categories who are way, way, way different personalities, and people who you would think would fit into one of them that don't because they just don't have that type of platform for whatever reason. So if you think about the difference between the spine that is like a very strong kind of bone structure. It has a lot of veracity to it. Whereas the plant can kind of be organic and it takes on a little bit different quality and it has this sort of soil, water, heat, seed combination, right? So there is a combination of those four elements that's going to produce optimal growth for this plant. It's not necessary just because you're a sandbox that you will have only ever sandbox platforms, that this platform you have right now is a sandbox. You may be able to produce more sandboxes or you may not. You may eventually have a superstar platform or you may not. It does not require you, so your personality does not require you to be in a certain way. And the most famous example I use, just because we all joke about whether or not I am a sandbox or a superstar platform, in particular with the personality alignment stuff that I have. Do I grow like a superstar platform or do I grow like a sandbox platform? Those are two of the different growth engines, right? I am a person who, if you looked at my strengths and my Enneagram number, you might think, oh, yeah, this person might be in the superstar category because they have that type of personality that might make them be that way. But I don't necessarily have a superstar platform because when I try to create growth like a superstar platform, it doesn't happen. So then that means to be okay, I probably have a sandbox platform. So let's experiment with that. And then it turns out when I do that, I grow by extreme measures. So we've done some things this year to align my growth patterns more with sandbox than superstar. And I have a feeling that it's going to create more growth for us because when I've done that in the past, we have grown more. And so I'm hopeful that that will happen, but I don't know for sure because there are a lot of other factors besides just which growth engine do you likely have in the car that you're driving in your author career right now. Um, and there are more factors than that, but the one that I can control, again, like what is within my control, is how I make decisions about the platform growth that I have and how I'm going to spend my time. So I don't spend my time doing things that superstar platforms might do because I don't think I have a growth engine in my Better Faster Academy car. But I am now making different decisions to align myself in that way. And I am hopeful that that will change how everything works. So, what that means in terms of how alignment can work is that I have to do kind of two different types of decision making alignments. One is me as a person and how do I function? How do I make the best decisions for my strengths? So, how do I develop my strengths? Clifton Strengths is the metric that we use in that way. And then how do I keep the anchors in my Enneagram motivation? How do I keep the anchors from holding me down? And how do I go more towards the magnets, right? The things that I desire because of the particular type of core motivation that I have. And we're working a lot with Claire Taylor. We talked about this before. We're doing some licensing of her content to be able to work with Enneagram in the way that will help people understand the anchors and the magnets and then hopefully get some of us some bigger engines, right? Because I think that for me, that this engine concept is going to be such an important part of our growth platform over the next several months. And my goal is to do each one of the growth engines on the Quitcast because of the limitations of time and because, like, frankly, I have a lot more content about each individual one that I'm going to deliver. But so, like, we're going to talk about it more in the digital conference, but I want to deliver some actionable help on this episode. So we're going to do episodes for each of the types, like each of the growth engines. And I'm going to give you some actionable stuff in each engine. And my hope is if you cannot afford to come to the conference, that you would get enough help in this episode that you would actually be able to take action on your alignment. And then if you follow our Patreon, which you can do for free, by the way, but if you follow our Patreon, you can get consistent help in that alignment. We do an awful lot of free content and free help around here. especially as we get into more difficult economic times. We just want to make sure we're doing what we can to give you the help that you need in a way that is the most helpful for you also. But again, like we have to keep the lights on and we have to be able to continue to provide this content. So for those of you who can afford to pay, we are going to do a conference on this where I'm going to go into much, much, much greater detail. And we're going to use some of like the Enneagram alignments. We're going to talk a little bit about strengths alignments. We're going to talk about some archetypes alignments as well. But the goal in these particular Quitcast episodes is to outline what a growth engine is, which again is what we're talking about here. And then I'll talk about the first type in just a second. But to outline what an engine is and the difference between sort of that personality sort of spine alignment and then this plant alignment, which happens when you have a pathway that is a decision-making pathway. So here's why the difference is so important. Personality metrics that have been highly tested and highly refined over decades, like the Enneagram and the strengths, have gone through the battery. Like there is such a high level of scrutiny on both of these systems. And what that requires is a lot of people utilizing it and pushing back and making people get better at the explanations and the definitions and the development pathways. So when you have something that's been around for decades that has been really, really pushed on and scrutinized, you have a better tool than something that has just only recently been discovered. So part of the reason we don't do as much work with our archetype system is that they really are not definable personality structures, I don't think. We go back and forth about this, like just a nerdy side note, which you can skip if you would like to the next minute. But I think it's important. The nerdy side note here is I do a lot of coding when I take like notes on my coaching sessions. So I'm always typing and I know it bugs some people when I do this, but like I'm always typing when I'm listening because I want to try to capture as much of the memory of this as I can for the person so that if I coach them again, I will have more of this information. But then it also helps me because I'm coding some of these behaviors as I'm taking notes. And what that coding looks like, if you're not familiar with this type of behavioral analysis, it's the attribution, right? So like if someone says something and it makes me look at their strengths and or their Enneagram type and say, oh, that sounds like communication, or oh, that sounds like input, then I will look for it because I always have their strengths up in the corner and their Enneagram type and things like their DISC and Myers-Briggs and Big Five and like literally anything I can get my hands on because I want to be able to find the actual attribution for it. So I do this coding of like, that's a competition thing. That's a analytical thing. That's a command thing. That sounds like 8 Enneagram question mark, right? Because I'm still learning a lot of the language of the way that Enneagram presents itself, which learner is fun for me. Did you hear me do that brackets? If I had, I'm even in myself when I talk, I still sort of bracket these things like I'm attributing them for research because I want to know where they come from. And that's the tagline that used to be on our podcast when I had a verbal intro all the time was anyone can tell you what worked for them and they can say it might not work for you, but they can't tell you why. I can tell you why. And the reason I can tell you why is because I am obsessed with figuring out why things happen. And from a behavioral standpoint, I want to know what's causing it. So is it a biological cue, which is always a question mark for me, right? If I think it's like, ask a question about perimenopause, ask a question about meds, ask a question about, and not that people need to share that information with me, but I need to tell them it's possible that this could be attributable to blah, 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 and blah. So please go see a doctor, right? Or it's possible that this is an issue with IFS or CBT or whatever. So please go see a therapist. Like a lot of that for me, that coding is understanding where it could be coming from and knowing where to send you to get the answers, which again, if you know strengths, I'm a number one input. So, of course, I am obsessed with trying to understand how to help people with whatever it is that they're struggling with. So, I'm constantly coding these things with either behavioral or sometimes neurological, sometimes biological, environmental, right? That's essentially what our Right Better Faster class is all about. It is the what are all the potential factors that might be impacting your productivity, and how can we help you understand how to create these keystones that will help you execute better in multiple different areas by changing very few things, by changing little things, these keystone habits. So when we do that, battery where we're just constantly asking you questions, trying to figure out where things are coming from, trying to help you understand how to align yourself, etc. We are looking for the spines so that we can help you be a better decision maker. So that is more personality alignment in terms of where is this coming from, we're attributing, right? So as I'm coding things in my notes, when I'm listening to people or when I'm in WBF or our refresher course or anything online at Facebook, threads, whatever, I'm constantly listening for where the attribution might be coming from and then coding it either in my head or if it's in a coaching session in my notes. And sometimes I do this in my social media responses where I'll put like, achiever in parentheses just to attribute it for the person, right? But I'm always looking for that. And what I found in some of these archetypal decision-making pathways, like the right to market archetypes that we've talked about, the sustainability archetypes, or these platforms, these growth engines for a vertical platform growth, um, I can hear the pathways very consistently. I know the decisions that are being made, but there's so many different places that it comes from. Because I can usually also hear, like if someone is making, if somebody has a sandbox platform and they are doing certain things that are pretty well aligned with sandbox platform growth, then I can hear like, oh, that's a woo thing, that's an achiever thing, that's a relator thing. Like I can hear the personality alignment in it, but there also is an additional alignment, which is about the books themselves or about the platform itself. So some of it is a personality alignment, some of it is the correct spine of the business or the correct spine of the platform or of the series or whatever, because it can be different. Like I may have a superstar giant platform as Becca Syme, let's say. I still don't think that I do, but I might. But I definitely have a sandbox platform with the personality alignment stuff, especially with archetypes and strengths and Enneagram, right? So like that for me is all very located in the sandbox. And the correct way to grow that, that is what growth engines are. It's that there is a particular way that this engine type is constructed. That means if you feed it certain types of fuel, it is more likely to produce growth because of why the growth is happening. What is the need that it's meeting in people? In the original conference, when we first started discussing it, is we talked about supernatural a lot because it has spawned so many different things out of this one world, right? But in a sandbox platform, there are certain things that are create growth because of what the consumers want to get out of it. And that is the why behind the growth engine. So understanding the why, which is very common with every principle, by the way. This is why I make so much content about so many different things, is that there is a why behind why these aligned processes work. And if we can understand more about that, we have a lot more control over making decisions around the process. So when you think about a growth engine in particular, right, because that's what we're here to talk about today, the alignment chemistry, I guess, because I do think of these as more like plants, just because they can really be pretty hardy no matter what you do to them. Like a growth engine that's just going to grow that way is just going to grow that way. And you can make decisions to help it grow better. Like you can learn more about the particular type of plant that you have. And some of you have to learn by doing, and that's fine. You don't have to learn in a workshop. But you learn how to manage it better by growing it. You learn how to manage it better by doing things like this, consuming our Quitcast content, doing things like our conference or our Patreon or something like that. You can do growth by talking to other people. You can understand more about the growth who have things like you. So, one of the things we're going to do out of the conference is we're going to create some opportunities for people who have a similar type of engine to be able to learn together and grow together afterwards. So, a lot of what we're doing, I think, in this is just trying to give you some language to speak better to each other about what it is that's happening in your platform. I'm less interested with you identifying as something because I still don't actually think that archetypes are personality. But the reason that I brought up how young it is that I have a feeling that when Don Clifton was first looking at the strengths, that there was a possibility he thought these behavior clusters were not located with gravity inside of a personality system, just because he is a number two, I think, individualization. He's passed now. I always feel like saying rest in peace because he's sort of like the godfather of strengths. And not just that he was the progenitor of it, but also that he's like, he's the person that still looms large over me in terms of what his desire for the original system was about, and how much I want to honor what he wanted out of the original system. But when you're young in the development of understanding something, like you've just discovered these things, it's so much harder to see them with the breadth that you can. Like when I first started talking about them, I think our first conference on this was in 2020. And I was talking about them in coaching calls for years before that. And so when I first launched the discussion around these kind of decision architecture things, I understood them in a way that I thought was a personality structure. And the more that I understood them and got deeper into coaching them and teaching them and talking about them, the more I realized like there's just no consistency whatsoever in the actual personality locus, the way that there is with like a strengths or an Enneagram. And as I was talking with, I have a couple of friends who are really big into data analysis, who either have backgrounds in academics, like doctorates, and have run labs, or are really analytical, like high analytical in the Clifton strengths. And some of them are both. And it's almost like when you first have a theory about something, you have to just keep testing it until you figure out what's really going on. And you keep going down all of these different pathways trying to figure it out. And I feel like that's a little bit of what's happened with me with the archetypes is trying to decouple this expectation that archetypes are personality related because they can be attributable to multiple different things, and instead think of personality like the spine and think of the platform growth like or the right to market decision making structure or the pace project pace decision making structure, which is where things like the Phoenix come from, or the manuscript construction, sort of continuum, which is where like the bread machine comes from, or the sustainability structure, right? Like we have all of these different continuum structures of archetypal decision pathways where it is so much more like if all the elements are in alignment, then you get this growth that is bigger, right? Versus when they are not. And so then our goal as coaches is to try to understand those structures well enough to coach people through them. But what I've realized about being a personality person, like I am a content creator in personality stuff in success architecture. And what that means is when I talk about archetypes, people assume that they're personality related. And I sometimes talk about them like they're the same. You are a blah. And what I'm trying to do is shift my speaking so that I say things that sound more like you have a blah. You have a sandbox. You have a superstar. You have a laboratory. You have a respawn and or a spawn, but I need to say respawn because when we first introduced the spawn growth engine, everybody was saying tadpoles, like tadpoles, and I was like, no, 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 like video games, like you spawn and respawn, and we had so much confusion about it that I tried changing the name a couple of times, especially when I was coaching and I would talk about it like the core of that methodology is about the pathway, right? So I would talk about the decisions that spawns might make in different language, and it just still wasn't landing. So I'm like, you know what? We're going to workshop this. So when I say we're going to do these 4 videos, we're going to do that one last because I want to try to give myself some time to figure out exactly what I want to say about it, so that we can have a name that actually has some locus. So the reason I'm not just doing like 4 different vehicles or 4 different animals or 4 whatever is that you have to be able to think about the alignment structure and the picture of the thing in ways that relate to each other. So when I say spawn and you think tadpole, then you're trying to make decisions that are in alignment with how tadpoles work instead of how video games work. So I have to figure out how to describe those differences in a way that the decisions you're going to make to take care of that platform and the decisions that you would make to be a good video game player are the same. And also how a parent of a tadpole would be caring for that, right? So like, yeah, I don't know how we're going to do that one yet. It's still a work in progress, but I do know that I can describe enough of it to hopefully help you understand how to manage it. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about alignment, and I want to talk for just a second about what a growth engine is, and then we're going to spend a little time talking about actionable stuff with sandboxes because I want to start there. I think it's the easiest and most accessible one to talk about. And we've already discussed it just a little bit, but here's what a growth engine is. When I think of the way platforms grow, we want them to grow vertically, right? Like we want them to be, there's a concept called vertical integration, and it has to do with how many different ways you consume a similar product, right? Or how many different manifestations or iterations you have of something. And so, what I found when I was talking about vertical platforms, which to me in my head, I'm watching the building get constructed and going vertical, right? Or watching people drive along a highway and take this road and then it's going vertical, right? Like for me, that word was easy to understand when we started talking about it. It was getting confused. So growth engine is more true to what's happening in the platform. So why is the growth happening? Why is the building getting constructed? Why is the car moving along this highway correctly? It's because this engine is doing what it's supposed to do. So there are these different types of engines that you can have inside of your platform that if you give them the right fuel and maintain them in the right way, they'll work for you. And then the goal is that they would work for you for longevity. So if you continue to fuel it, if you continue to give it the maintenance that it needs, etc., that it will grow in the correct direction and it will cause the building to kind of get constructed around it. And I know I'm mixing metaphors. I apologize for that. But the growth engine concept is an important, like getting your head around that is important because when you are making decisions, we always want to be looking at the outcomes of those decisions. And I think so many of us are making decisions and we are just sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping things work. And we don't really understand how to evaluate when things are working or not. And we don't understand how to experiment well. One of the things we're going to do in the conference is talking about experiment design, as a way of how do I create something that has the structure that will give me the outcome that I'm looking for. And the outcome I'm looking for, yes, is growth, but it's also, is this the right way to grow my platform? Because everybody's going to grow a little bit different. So when you are first in early business phases of growth, you are doing a lot of experimentation. You're trying to figure out if growth will happen. And then once growth starts to happen, you need to maintain it, right? That's when we talked about the business phases. So as we are growing vertically with this engine that's causing us to move forward, then making the right choices looks like that's probably not going to help me because X. So I'm going to spend my time doing things that are more likely to give me results. And that's what I mean about the decision architecture, right? Choice architecture is This is likely to get me there. That's likely to get me there. How do I figure that out? I look at what feeds the engine, or I look at what is aligned in my spine, my personality spine, right? So that's kind of the basic core concept of growth engines. We'll talk a lot more about it in the subsequent videos. But I want to talk about the first engine, which is the Sandbox engine. And there are four types: sandboxes, superstars, laboratories, and respawns or spawns. And by the way, those of you who are spawn, because we talked about this in one of our previous conferences, if you still have suggestions about them, because there were several people who are like, this is definitely me, but I don't know if I resonate with that title, then please feel free to put comments in about what you think that the title should be, because I'm willing to take suggestions. And then what I'll do is I'll try them out in coaching to see how they respond, how people respond to it. Because that's usually how I do like the, testing, right? We make content or I coach about it. But the Sandbox platform has an engine of a reader imagination where they are so inspired by someone or something inside of the world that they want to play around at the sandbox and make their own sandcastles. So there's something that has sparked them, and it might be a universal fantasy, to use Theodora Taylor's word. Seven Figure Fiction, I think, is the title of that book if you want to go look it up. But it might be something like a trope. It might be the Jennifer Lynn Barnes concept of like id list, right? Where you're meeting some kind of core id moment for a person. Whatever it is that you are doing that sparks imagination in the person, in the fans, it isn't just in one person. The testing for sandboxes is it happening with multiple different people? So Supernatural, as a sandbox platform, has literally spawned an entire genre of fiction in Omegaverse, right? The imagination was so great that there was something that spawned in some, I can't use the word spawn anymore, but there was something that sparked inside the imagination of people who were consuming Supernatural, that they all had a similar enough desire to see something happen that they continued to write about it and write about it until it developed its whole own set of structures and expectations. They developed a whole trope system around that because, right? So that sparking of imagination was so extreme that it created imagination in all these other ways. You can have imagination that sparks, even if it is content that's your engine, which is what the laboratories and respawns are. But the world as, or the characters as food for imagination is what you get. And for me, this is the big difference between like Marvel and DC, right? Marvel sparks imagination and shows us what's possible. Not necessarily intentionally, I don't think. I don't think somebody was making a conscious choice, but something about the combination of chemistry elements in that makes us want to enter that world and do more in that world, right? This is why I think Strengths and Enneagram are both sandbox platforms. They are systems that are so well oiled and easy to understand that they spark imagination and a desire for utilization in someone's own life. So it isn't just that they like the language or that they like the typing, because there's lots of types out there, like typing systems out there that don't resonate in the same way that Strengths resonates. And I think it's because when you so closely identify with something that's so accurate and correct, and it helps you get the thing that you want, which is you want understanding, you want acceptance, you want belonging, you want ease, less friction, whatever it is that you want, it can get you that thing that you're looking for. And then the more you use it, the more of that thing you get. And I think that's the big piece about sandboxes that's really important, is that you don't lose the sense of imagination when the book is done. you continue to want to live inside of that world. And so most of us who think we have sandbox platforms because we're writing big world stuff, it's a sandbox for us. But the test is it a sandbox for this platform? So it can't just be that I want to write a sandbox book or I want a sandbox world. I can try to do that, but I'm still creating a content platform until I see the evidence that the readers are there with me, that the watchers or viewers are there with me. And then it shifts into becoming a sandbox platform because then if you give them the food that they want, which is more access to the imagination of the world. And sometimes that means more books, but oftentimes it does not. Oftentimes, the sandbox platforms are the easiest place to be able to create experiences around it that self generate income, not just that pay for themselves, because there are plenty of content driven platforms where, so content driven platforms like the laboratory and the respawn are what the readers really want is more content. They just want more books. They don't really want access to anything else. They just want more books because they're so loving the experience of reading the book when they read it. And you could have people who are making 8 figures of income who are writing content platforms. So it's not like there's all the money in the sandbox or all the money in the superstar, no money in content. There's all the money in all 4 types. It's just that the way you get there is different, right? The way you get to the laboratory is different than the way you get to the respawn. We'll talk about that. The way you get to the superstar is different. The way you get to the sandbox is different. But it is the readers who are deciding whether or not you have done the thing. So the way you know, you have to be probably a little bit far into releasing books before you know 100% for sure that you have a sandbox platform. I have a couple of clients who have sandbox platforms that are very consumed by fan attention. So sandboxes and superstars are going to be very consumed people. Some highly, highly successful content platforms like the laboratories and the respawns will also be very, very consumed by fan attention, but it's because they want more books, right? So you might not be able to do some of the things that a sandbox would do to generate income apart from the books. But if you know you have a sandbox platform, then you need to align your decisions with that platform and give the readers more of what they want if what you want is the growth of that platform. And it's important to say, even if you have a sandbox platform, you can still treat yourself like a laboratory or a respawn if you would prefer not to engage with fans on that level. It's just that the fans are eventually going to not be excited enough about the sandbox anymore when you're not giving them the opportunity. So you won't be able to grow maybe in some of the exponential ways that you would grow, or you might see people trying to create fan experiences about your stuff where you are not the person who is the progenitor of it, but the fans are. And again, I think that's okay. But when you have a sandbox platform, you want to give readers the opportunity. If you have a content-based platform and you want to have a sandbox platform, or you think you might have one, then start doing things that do not include books as experiences for the outside fan world. So you might try to do something like trading cards. Like when Crystal and I wrote together, we had a platform that I'm like, this might actually work for us if we made trading cards for each one of these. We wrote shifters so that we had all these different alphas in packs around the world. We're like, let's do trading cards for each one of the alphas. And it was really fun. We had a great time, but we launched it and it didn't create any growth, right? Because what happens when you have a world-based or characters-based platform is that when you create an experience for them that is outside of the books, that's extra book, right? It makes them grow in their desire to have more of it. And it makes them share the experience with other fans in a way that creates more of a virus style growth. And usually the books are so popular that you will know that you have this type of platform. But when you're in the early phases like you were, you may not always know. So sometimes it can be worth doing an experiment to see if you can create something outside of the books that will make the books grow. So a huge popular thing right now in Sandbox platform growth testing is Kickstarters. So trying to do something like, if any of you followed the Bonkers Romance Kickstarters, when they did the pirate one, right, that actually came with pirate booty um, in the package, I thought, oh, this is such a great like test of whether or not a particular series, not that that's what they were trying to do, I don't think it was, but I thought this is a really great test for a particular series to have a Kickstarter that has a very specific collectible item that if the fans get it, they're going to want more of them. So we did this, and unfortunately, I don't have any of them around. We did this with our Kickstarter of the Stuck List cards and the Energy Pennies cards, where I did a whole Kickstarter that was just for a piece of content. It wasn't really about the book. We were launching these, pieces of content. And inside them, we had these special cards that said a specific phrase that was a collectible thing. We were only doing them during the Kickstarter. And then the test was if I talk about this Damn It Becca card and if I talk about this Fill the Bank card, are people going to use it as a way to say, hey, you are going to want this card? Because if you haven't been around the BFA for very long, you won't know, or if you haven't been around the Quitcast for very long. But when I do in-person events, we have these fans that Annette first made, which this was such a brilliant idea. Thank you, Annette, by the way. We had these fans that had a caricature of me on it with the words "Damn it, Becca" on the fan, and then they're handheld, right? So people would hold them up during conference events, during talks that I would give, because when I would say something that would sort of hit them hard, they would be like, "Damn it, Becca." And then it proliferated, right? So when we had these, everybody wants one of these when they come to the events, and I always get questions like, "Oh my gosh, do you have any fans on you?" To the point where like people bring them on calls. When we're on these live calls, I will see people's faces on Zoom and they'll have their "Damn It Becca" signs, and then they'll hold them up when I say something because they have their cameras on. So this has become sort of part of our Sandbox platform in the Better Faster Academy, where we have these fans. And one of the things that I said to Crystal when we were doing the Kickstarter discussion was we should make these fans part of the Kickstarter so that if people get this special early bird, whatever, that we can see if it will create platform growth in order to have these fans. So again, we're doing these tests and they're very limited, and we picked something that is likely to be collectible, something that would create platform growth if it happened. And then we're going to focus some of our marketing to our internal people. We're not going to put any of this on the sort of the big Kickstarter. It's more like I'll put it on my social media, I'll put it on my Patreon, I'll put it in my newsletter, and we will see if it creates growth. So we'll have, and you'll see this happen. You will not have seen it yet if you're watching this live, but you'll see this happen when we do this pre-launch, that we'll do special emails and special posts that the only thing they have in the title is the "Damn It Becca" fan, right? And do you want one? And that will be the test of the platform growth. Is this a collectible item? And it's funny because because it is about me as a person, it could technically be a test for a superstar platform as well. But I'm using a collectible item that will create more growth among fandom, to test and see if this is going to be a big enough growth opportunity to engage a huge portion of my current base, right? Like my current platform. And that is a test of whether or not our sandbox is going to be inspired by things that are more collectible. And that isn't the only test, but that's just one particular example. You could do something if you wanted to run a test that didn't require a lot of work and didn't require a lot of um, um, uh, investment, right? You could do something like create character background art in Canva, or go and hire an illustrator and have some digital products made that are for characters, and then do something on your newsletter where you're asking them to give you a commitment of some kind. So either uh, I don't think we can do this with reviews because I think this is unethical. But I don't know that for sure. So if you know that it isn't, I just can't remember what the rules are. But if you do something like I'm gonna give everyone on my platform this thing if you sign up for my additional newsletter, or if you click to this landing page or something so that you can see what the interest is like. And then you ask them to share about it on social media. And then you take the time to make them very cool for fans. Like something that if you were a fan or you talk to one of your fans and have them help you consult on this, where you give them something that is worth talking about. So the Supernatural, as an example of this, sandbox, if the creators of Supernatural said, here is a special thing that is for like core fans, and it has like their car on it, right? Like the baby car. And if it has their car on it, and this is like something that would be a limited a collectible, etc., you would see a spike in fan growth and discussion because of the way that it sparks the imagination of them to re-enter the sandbox of that world and start making their own sandcastles again. So we want to try to create an opportunity for people to have something that is actually special. And this is why I said sometimes it's harder to do this with digital products only, because you need to make it something that feels really special. So like a phone background that's like shaped in a phone, shaped for a phone, that has like a character on it with some kind of phrase the character always says. Or you have like a trailer that you can share, but it has to be something that the fans would take and talk to each other about, or create buzz, or oh my gosh, did you see this? So on Kickstarters, I see a lot of like NSFW art is a big thing, where people are like, oh, this thing is so cool, I want to see this, and then they talk about it and share it, and they're telling other people about it. It creates buzz, right? And that is the spark of imagination that enters people into that world, is being able to physically see those characters together. Like it makes people want to talk about them. So when you have something that sparks imagination, that is belongs to the person, it has to be downloadable, or I have a client who has a sandbox platform who on her Patreon does things like, you give me a scene and I create a story for this. So she does a post every once in a while where she says, everybody give me an idea that you want. And then everybody on that level gets to suggest a pairing or a story or a moment from a previous character that they want. And she basically just goes down the list and writes each one of those stories. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I was on a Buffy Patreon where somebody was just like the creators, right? Because I don't want just anyone, or I would be on AO3 or something, or I would be on fan fiction sites to do this. But if the creator would make me like, I want to see this moment that you never wrote, or I want to see these two characters doing this thing. Like I want a alternate timeline where Xander and Anya end up together, or I want blah, right? Whatever it is, then I would pay so much money to see those things, because Buffy is one of the only sandboxes that I have actual fandom thoughts for. Like, if you've watched our podcast episodes on Buffy, we did two of them. I did an episode with two friends who are psychologists, like a PhD psychologist, and one of them is my sister, spoiler alert. And we were talking about this tour, like a set tour that my sister created, that each of us subsequently went on with her, that was all of the different filming locations in and around the Los Angeles area where they filmed things that were Buffy. And like we went to each and every one of them. And like I wouldn't do that for very many things, but because Buffy sparks my imagination in a way that makes me want to enter and re-enter and enter and re-enter that world, then I want to go to all the filming locations. In another TV show that I love and adore, How I Met Your Mother, which I'm showing my age when I say these things. But I would never want to go to any of the filming locations for that show because that's a content thing for me. And to be fair, I don't even know that I would want more episodes of that show because I also feel like my content desire ended before the last season of that show happened. We could talk about that later, but but I don't have sandbox feelings about How I Met Your Mother. I would actually argue that probably there aren't very many people who do, because I don't think that show sparked imagination in the same way that Buffy did. And I don't know that that was intentional. I'm sure the creators would have loved it. I want you to run a content test of some kind that is something a reader or a consumer could have and own, needs to be either a digital product they can download and utilize in some way or a physical product that you can sell them. If you have a Shopify store, you can do it there. If you run Kickstarters, you can do it there. If you have Patreon, you may be able to do it there, although you have to use whatever swag that they have. And I really think it needs to be a usable piece of swag. I don't know that I would do pens or bookmarks or, like we have a bunch of author for life glasses, things. Those are more swag. This is collectible. If it's going to be a sandbox and it's going to create growth in your platform, it has to be something that is collectible. So it has to be a limited time offer. So this isn't something that's just going to go up on your website for forever. This is something that if you create a sense of scarcity for people, that you will test whether or not you have the capacity to grow in that area. And I just want to say again, these are plants and not spines. So you may have just too early of a platform to know for sure if you have a sandbox. So you may not just want to give up after doing one test, especially because who knows how people are going to respond in today's economy. But you may not want to give up after one test. You may want to set a reminder for yourself in a couple of years to run another sandbox test, just so that you have the ability to see if you have this kind of platform. Because if you have a desire for collectibles, you will have a desire for other parts of sandbox growth. And we're going to talk more about that in the conference, but I want you to think about, how do I create some kind of experience that is limited and scarce to test and see whether or not there is interest in the imagination sparking of playing around in my sandbox. You could try something like what I described about the Patreon as well, where you have like a special level that people can engage in sandboxing with you, where you are saying like, okay, on this level of my Patreon, I'm going to create a story that you ask me to create, a flash fiction story. I think hers are only like 500 or 800 words long, has to be under 1,000 words. And then she also gets to retain the rights to those, so she can publish all those at some point if she wants to, or like make them into a lead magnet or something. But right now they are a sandbox level on her Patreon, right? So if you could run a test like that if you wanted to, but I would suggest that it is more scarce than that. And I would suggest that you limit it to just that in your testing. So don't run a giant, and again, like special editions only work for this if you are limiting it to the Kickstarter. If you're going to then sell them in your store after that, it doesn't feel limited to them. So it doesn't actually give you all of the elements of the platform experiment design that we're looking for. And again, we'll talk about that more in the conference. But special editions to me do not count for this, because you can have special editions that will sell because you have a content platform, but then they don't need to be scarce in order for you to do that. They can be if you want them to be. Like sometimes that makes readers want to engage more, but I feel I don't love that idea for content platforms, just because it doesn't need to be that way. And if you don't need to create scarcity in your readers, you don't want to. You don't want to become a platform that's constantly making people feel afraid they're going to miss out on stuff, because their ability to maintain that interest in your platform is going to wane as they get more frustrated with constantly feeling FOMO. And again, unless you have a sandbox platform, and then it's different. Okay, we've talked enough about this. Go and design your experiments. We will talk more about the other growth engines in subsequent episodes of this Quitcast. I hope this has been helpful for you and I hope you have enjoyed it. We will put links to register for things in the show notes. We have a bunch of free content. We have some free courses. There's a bunch of free stuff on the Patreon. So if you don't have the finances to invest in this, it's okay. You can do experiment design on your own. Hopefully, I've given you the tools that you need. And if not, you can come to our free coaching that we do in public on our Crowdcast, which I'll also link to, that we do every month. You can ask questions there. And then you can also seed questions for next time. So, like if you miss the one that's in June, because I think we're going to air this after the free for June has run, you can put it on the July one and ask the question there. So we'll do more content about this coming. I hope to see you at the conference. I think it's going to be a fun one. We're going to talk in deep dives about these platform growth engines and talking about how to do experiment design for them as well. We're also going to have the JOMO and the FOMO option like we did last time, so that if you can only spend a smaller amount of money, you can pick just the workshops that are going to be relevant for you. And there's more information about that on the sales page about how we've structured those payments. And then, yeah, we will see you on the next Quitcast, everybody. Thanks so much for being here and paying attention. Bye.